Well, hello, everyone. What a wonderful day it is today. Why? Because you're here, God's here, and we're all together. And you think about it, we really are a family. We all have the same spiritual DNA. So this is my first sermonette in 50 years, believe it or not. I've used an excuse in recent years when asked to speak. I said, well, I'll tell you what, when I hit 100 years old, I'll give my first sermonette. And then I can say anything I want and get away with it. I have 25 years to go, and I thought, well, maybe I should start now. I really would hate to have them wheel me up in a wheelchair to give a sermonette. If you like a title, my title is Valuable Lessons. Just who is the boss? Valuable lessons. Just who is the boss? So for the first 14 years of my life, I grew up near here, out on Route 82 on a 10-acre farm that my dad bought when I was 1 year old, and we lived there until I was 14. And, you know, when I was about 11 years old, I decided I wanted to get a job. I thought, I need to get a job. And if you wonder what that picture is, that's about my first job. So I walked down the road to an old farmhouse with a grizzly old farmer. You know, he had chewed the tobacco, and I asked him for a job. He said, "Get lost, kid." So anyway, I didn't give up, and I must have went down there 4 or 5 different times. And finally, he said, okay, be here at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. So I said, well, how much are you going to pay me? He said, how much do you want? And I said, $1 an hour. So he said, okay, we'll be here at 8 o'clock in the morning. I was so excited. So 8 o'clock the next morning, I'm there bright and early. And knowing how I am now, I was probably there 15 minutes early. So I waited and waited, and about 10 o'clock, he came out of the house. So my job that day was to stand up in the hayloft, and he had his tractor with a claw-like device that he used to pick up bales of straw, bales of hay, whatever they were at the time, hoist them up, and I was supposed to whistle when he got that at the level where they could put it over to the hayloft. The problem was they couldn't whistle. And he was so disgusted, and he had to, use his superior whistling ability to demonstrate how good he was, and he put his 2 fingers in his mouth, and I'm thinking, this guy was a farmer. He put his 2 fingers in his mouth, but he could really whistle. So anyway, I worked hard that day, about 6 hours, and about halfway through, he said, all right, time to eat lunch. My wife has lunch ready. And I thought, oh boy, I like to eat. Walked up to the house, followed him up there, and on his back porch, he had a stack of crates of pop. And he saw me looking at them, and he said, would you like one? I said, yeah. He said, okay, go ahead. So I got the bottle of pop, and as I did that, he went in the house, slammed the door behind him. I thought we were going to eat lunch. So about an hour later, he came back out, went back to work. So at the end of the day, he said, okay, go home, kid. I said, you got to pay me? Oh, sure. So he reached in his pocket, right in his pocket, pulled out a handful of change, counted out 90 cents. I thought you were going to pay me $1 an hour. He said, well, you only did an hour's worth of work. And it's a dime for the bottle of pop. So, let me ask you a question. Who was the best boss you ever had? I'm sure we've all had bosses, man, woman. Who was the best boss you ever had? Put that in the back of your mind. Sit them back there in a chair, and we'll go back to that later. So a few years later, we moved back into the city, into Elyria. And when I was 16, I got a job at McDonald's. Took a reduction in pay. It was 70 cents an hour. And the manager of McDonald's was a man named Darrell Keene. And I was always so impressed. He had this certificate in his office framed that he had graduated from the School of Hamburgerology at McDonald's University. So I'm working second shift and going to school in the daytime. I didn't really like school. I really did not like school. And I said, Mr. Keene, if I quit school, would you give me a job in the daytime? He looked at me and he said, absolutely not. I'll fire you in a second. So that's a valuable lesson, and I neglected to mention my first valuable lesson from the old farmer was, as I went home, my mom said that, he was teaching you a valuable lesson. What I found out later was, leave me alone, kid, I don't need any help. But in this case with Mr. Keene, the lesson was, don't neglect proper training and education. Very important. So when I was a boy, my dad would often talk to me about when he worked during the years of the Great Depression. And he worked in a manufacturing firm in Elyria from the time he was 18 for 44 years. And he told me that when the business was bad because of the financial ruin of the Depression years, that every week they call a certain number of people into the office and say, sorry, you're gone. And once that happens, you never got another job, as long as that depression was on. My dad told me that when he didn't have work to do on his machine, that he'd find a broom, he'd find cleaning materials, he'd sweep the floor, he'd go in the bathroom, he'd clean the bathroom. He never got called into the office. He never got laid off. So that was a valuable lesson too. The third one is hard work is intrinsic, I can't pronounce it, is virtuous and brings reward. So then there's other valuable lessons. You have that guy that person in the back of your mind, best boss. Who was the worst boss you ever had? The absolute worst boss. Think of that. Put them in a chair next to that other one. So best boss, worst boss. So if we go to 1 Peter 2, 18 to 20, and this is the Amplified Bible version, the Amplified version where Peter wrote, servants, employees, same difference, be submissive to your masters with all proper respect, not only to those who are good and kind, but also those who are unreasonable. For this finds favor. If a person endures the sorrow of suffering unjustly because of the will of God, after all, what kind of credit is there if when you do wrong and are punished for it, you endure it patiently? But if you do what's right and you patiently bear undeserved suffering, jerk boss, whatever, this finds favor with God, though. Colossians 3, 22 to 28. This is the Amplified version throughout. Obey your earthly masters in everything and do it, not only when their eye is on you and to win their favor. That'd be like living a lie. Well, here comes the boss. I better look like I'm busy, get rid of the cell phone or whatever. But with sincerity of heart and reverence for the Lord. Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for men, as if it's men, even though it is, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. It is the Lord Christ that you are serving. Jody told me after working in human resources for many years that you should see your job as making the boss look good. Well, the way you do that is you do your job. No matter what, you make the boss look good. That's from 1 Jody 2:1. But what's the point? The point is to see God as the real boss. Now, you got that bad boss, good boss in your mind. But whatever your picture of Jesus Christ is, in another chair, right in front of them, 3 chairs. Good boss, bad boss, Jesus Christ. So the point is, in Colossians, is to obey your earthly masters in everything and do it not only when their eyes are on you, we read that. Whatever you do, do it as if it is the Lord Christ you are serving. The point is to see God as the real boss, that one that's sitting behind the desk in the office, the foreman that's over there, no matter how bad or good he is, if he's a jerk, kind of tune out him and say, okay, I got to do this as if I'm working for Jesus Christ. Ultimately, it is God whom a true follower of Christ must obey by working properly, honestly, and obediently. We need to have the mindset that the one who signs our check, who supervises our work, is not the real boss, that God is the real boss. So is it fair? Is it fair? No, it's not. In a lot of cases, it's not fair. But if you go to 1 Peter 2, 21 to 23, here's another synopsis on the same type of scriptures before. For as a believer, you've been called for this purpose since Christ suffered for you, leaving an example so that you may follow in his footsteps. He committed no sin, nor was deceit ever found in his mouth. He was reviled, he was insulted. He did not revile or insult in return while suffering. He made no threats of vengeance. He kept entrusting himself to him who judges fairly. That's the way to look at it if you have a bad boss. And I think there's maybe a whole lot more bad bosses than good bosses, to be quite honest. And, if you go to Ephesians 6, 5 to 9, be obedient to those who are your earthly masters, with respect for authority, with a sincere heart, seeking to please them, as service to Christ, not in a way of eye service, again, working only when someone is watching you and only to please men, but as slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart, rendering service with good will, as to the Lord, and not only to men, knowing that whatever good thing one does, he will receive this back from the Lord, whether he is slave or free or an employee. Ephesians 6 describes our relationship to our boss, saying that we should obey our earthly masters just as you would obey Christ. It's simple. Again, if the boss tells you to do something and you don't feel like doing it, take a deep breath. Visualize that Jesus Christ is standing there asking you to do it. That's a true work ethic for a Christian. That is, unless it's something sinful, you should consider it as if Christ is telling you. 1 Peter 2:18 shows the principle that Christians should submit themselves to their bosses, even if the boss is harsh and unfair. I've held a lot of jobs where I've learned a lot of valuable lessons, and sometimes the hard way. I was probably the worst boss in some cases. In other cases, I was probably the best boss. I'm self-employed now, and I'm my own boss, and I think sometimes I'm my own worst boss, to be quite honest. So I've owned my own business. I employed others, worked for other business owners, I managed people. And I found that even though there are a lot of valuable lessons available, many people just don't get it. They just don't get it, So what's the most valuable lesson of this story? It is work and live to serve Christ, and God will reward you in this life and many times over in the kingdom of God. So, just who is the boss? I hope everyone has a tremendous and awesome Sabbath day.